This video is created for storytelling while the real names, locations, and identifying information have been changed to protect the privacy and dignity of the individuals and families involved. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. On the morning of April 12, 2021, 28-year-old Elena Marquez left her apartment in the quiet city of Valnora, a northern Spanish town known more for its calm streets than for crime headlines. She told her mother she'd be making a short trip out to a rural village called San Estero, where her former boyfriend's family lived. It wasn't unusual. She had made that drive many times before. There was no tension in her voice, no sign of urgency, just a simple plan to return later that evening. But she never did. By mid-afternoon, Elena stopped replying to messages. At first, no one thought much of it. She was known for being focused, sometimes slow to respond when she was busy. But as the hours passed, something felt off. Her phone, usually always within reach, went completely silent. By evening, her mother's concern had turned into unease. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. By night, that unease had hardened into fear. Elena wasn't the type to disappear. She had grown up in a stable, middle-class household. Her parents had raised her with structure and independence, and she carried those traits into adulthood. She was organized, careful, and consistent, the kind of person who followed through on plans and never left people wondering. At school, she had been disciplined and focused, not the loudest in the room, but always reliable. She preferred small circles over large crowds, quiet evenings over chaos. Even her closest friends described her as someone who thought things through before acting. After finishing school, Elena enrolled at a local university, choosing to study social care and behavioral sciences. She wanted to help people, not in a dramatic, heroic way, but in steady, practical ways that made a difference. Her life wasn't complicated. It was structured, predictable, which made what happened next all the more disturbing. Elena had met Daniel Varela in 2018 through mutual friends. At the time, Daniel seemed grounded. He was a few years older, already working, and came across as respectful and attentive. Their relationship didn't rush. It built slowly, in a way that felt safe. He listened. He showed up on time. He didn't push boundaries. For Elena, that mattered. A few months into their relationship, Daniel introduced her to his family in San Estero, a small rural town tucked away in the hills. His parents were polite, if somewhat reserved. His younger sister, Lucia, was more open, curious about Elena, and eager to talk. Nothing about that first visit raised concern. Over time, Elena became a regular presence there. Weekend visits turned into routine. She blended into their quiet family life without friction. From the outside, everything looked stable, but stability can be deceptive. By late 2020, small changes began to appear. Daniel became harder to read. Conversations that once flowed easily turned strained. He avoided certain topics, especially anything related to his finances. He was in debt, around 12,000 euros, maybe more. Elena knew about it, but he never explained how he planned to deal with it. Whenever she asked, he brushed it off. "It's under control," he would say, but it clearly wasn't. He started disappearing for hours, sometimes days, without explanation. Messages would go unanswered, plans were canceled at the last minute. At first, Elena gave him space. Then she started noticing a pattern. Lucia's behavior changed too. She was still polite, still present, but something felt different. Conversations became shorter, less personal, as if she knew something she wasn't saying. Daniel's parents became distant as well. Where they once made small talk, now there was silence. Elena found herself slowly pushed to the edge of a family she had once felt a part of. By early 2021, the relationship had quietly fractured. There were no dramatic arguments, no clear ending, just distance. Daniel stopped talking about the future, stopped making plans, stopped showing up in ways that mattered. Elena didn't chase him. She understood something had changed, and she wasn't going to force what no longer existed. But she hadn't cut ties completely, which is why on April 12th, Elena got into her car and drove to San Estero one more time. The timeline was simple. She left around 9 a.m. Her phone remained active through the morning. Around noon, there was a final signal pinging her near San Estero. After that, nothing. No calls, no texts, no activity. Gone. That night, Elena's family reached out to Daniel. He answered, but his response raised more questions than answers. He said, "I haven't seen her." It didn't make sense. Elena had told her mother exactly where she was going, yet Daniel claimed she never arrived. What stood out even more was his tone. Flat, detached, not concerned. He didn't offer to help, didn't come to Valnora, didn't even suggest looking for her. It was as if her disappearance didn't involve him at all. The next morning, Elena's family went to the police. A missing person report was filed. Investigators began with the basics: phone records, travel routes, known contacts. The first confirmed detail came quickly. Elena had reached San Estero. Her phone data placed her there, which meant one thing. She hadn't disappeared on the way. She had made it to her destination. Search efforts began immediately. Police canvassed the area, spoke to locals, looked for anyone who might have seen her. One witness mentioned seeing a woman matching Elena's description near the edge of town, but it wasn't enough to confirm anything. There were no cameras covering that stretch of road, no clear trail. Then they found her car. It was parked near a small train station just outside the village. Locked, undamaged, inside were her belongings, her bag, her ID, everything except her phone. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no indication of panic. It looked staged, because Elena would never leave without her essentials, not voluntarily. The case shifted immediately. This wasn't a disappearance anymore. It was something else. Police brought Daniel in for questioning. He repeated the same story. "She never came to see me." Lucia said the same thing. So did their parents. A unified version of events, but it didn't match the data, and it didn't match Elena's behavior. By the end of the second day, the investigation escalated. Search teams expanded outward from the last phone signal, drones scanned wooded areas, volunteers joined in, combing through fields and abandoned paths. Elena's face began appearing across local news. A quiet woman with a structured life had vanished without explanation. And somewhere in San Estero, the truth was waiting, just out of reach. By the third day, the search had turned urgent. What had started as a missing person case was now being treated as a potential homicide. The tone among investigators had shifted. Every hour that passed without a trace of Elena Marquez narrowed the possibilities. Detective Sergio Alvarez stood at the edge of the search grid, watching volunteers move slowly through thick brush and uneven terrain. The area surrounding San Estero was rugged, scattered with ravines, abandoned paths, and dense vegetation. If someone wanted to hide something out here, they could. And that thought refused to leave him. The focus tightened around Elena's last known phone signal. A 3-kilometer radius, that was the working zone. Search dogs were brought in. Drones scanned from above. Teams worked in coordinated lines, marking off sections as they cleared them. Still, nothing. Until the fourth day. It was just after noon when a group of civilian volunteers noticed something unusual near a steep ravine at the edge of a wooded slope. Broken branches, disturbed soil, subtle but out of place. One of them followed the trail downward. What they found stopped everything. Elena's body was lying at the bottom of the ravine, partially concealed beneath branches, loose soil, and debris. It was clear she hadn't fallen there. She had been placed, carefully, but in haste. Police sealed off the area immediately. Forensic teams moved in, documenting every detail with precision. There were restraints around her wrists, plastic zip ties, tightened hard enough to leave marks. Injuries were visible, but investigators focused on patterns rather than appearances. There were signs she had been moved after death. Drag marks in the soil, disturbed vegetation leading down the slope, tire impressions not far from the upper edge. Whoever had done this hadn't planned perfectly. They had rushed. The preliminary forensic report came in quickly. Cause of death, asphyxiation. There was also evidence of a head injury, likely from blunt force. Severe, but not fatal. It may have rendered her unconscious. Time of death aligned with the window when her phone went silent, which meant everything had happened within a very tight framework. A controlled situation, not random. Back at the station, Detective Alvarez reviewed the timeline again. Elena arrives in San Estero. Shortly after, her phone goes dark. Within hours, she is dead. And then her body is transported and hidden. This didn't happen in the open, he said. This happened somewhere controlled, somewhere private. There was only one place that made sense. Daniel Varela's house. Police returned to the property with a warrant. This time they weren't asking questions. They were looking for answers. Inside, everything appeared normal at first glance. Clean, ordered, quiet. But forensic teams don't look at surfaces. They look at traces. In a small utility room near the back of the house, they found it. Faint blood evidence. Cleaned, but not completely removed. Tests confirmed it. The blood belonged to Elena. That changed everything. Daniel was brought in again. This time the tone was different. "You told us she never came here," Alvarez said, placing the report on the table. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Then came the first crack. "I didn't know what to say." Within hours, the investigation widened. Lucia Varela was taken into questioning. So was her former boyfriend, Mateo Ruiz, who had been seen in the area on the night Elena disappeared. At first, both denied involvement, but pressure does what time cannot. It reveals fractures. Lucia was the first to break. Her voice shook as she spoke, but her account was detailed, consistent, damning. "Elena came to the house," she said. "She and Daniel argued." "What about?" the investigator asked. "Money, everything, his debts, the lies. She confronted him." That part fit. According to Lucia, the argument escalated quickly. Voices raised, tension snapped. At some point, Daniel struck Elena. Not once, hard enough to knock her down. She hit her head. She stopped moving. "What did he do next?" Alvarez asked. Lucia hesitated, then said it. "He panicked, and then he didn't." That distinction mattered, because panic fades, decisions remain. Lucia admitted that Daniel made a choice. He didn't call for help. He didn't try to save her. Instead, he restrained her, and then he ended her life. The room went still. Even the officers who had heard confessions before felt the weight of it, not because it was loud, but because it was controlled. Lucia continued. Afterward, Daniel called her, not for help, for assistance. and she agreed. Matteo entered the picture shortly after. Lucia contacted him, asking him to come over. She didn't explain everything, but enough for him to understand it wasn't normal. By the time he arrived, Elena was already dead. Still, he stayed, and that decision tied him to everything that followed. Together, the three of them worked through the night, cleaning, moving, hiding. They wrapped the body, carried it out, and loaded it into a vehicle. Under darkness, they drove to the ravine. No witnesses, no interruptions, just a quiet attempt to erase what had happened. But they missed things, and small things solve cases. The zip ties found at the scene matched packaging recovered from the house. Fabric fragments matched items from the utility room. The blood, despite being cleaned, had seeped into places they couldn't reach. And then there was the timeline. Phones, movements, locations, all aligning. Daniel was arrested that same day. He didn't resist. At first, he denied everything again, but denial has limits when evidence stacks up. During his third interrogation, he shifted. Not a full confession, but enough. He didn't mean for it to happen, he said. Alvarez didn't react, because intent is often revealed not in the act, but in what comes after. And Daniel hadn't called for help. He had covered it up. Charges were filed quickly. Homicide, complicity, destruction of evidence. All three were taken into custody. The case that had started as a disappearance was now complete in structure, but not in understanding, because one question remained. Why? Debt, pressure, control, or something deeper that had been building long before that day. Detective Alvarez looked at Elena's file one last time before closing it for transfer to the courts. A structured life, a careful person, drawn into a situation that unraveled quietly until it didn't. Outside, San Estero had returned to its silence, but underneath that quiet surface, the truth had already left its mark, and no amount of distance would ever fully erase it. The trial began almost a year later. By then, Elena Marcus's name was no longer just a local headline. The case had spread far beyond Valnera and San Estero, drawing attention across the country, not because it was complex, but because it felt disturbingly simple. A normal day, a familiar visit, a life that ended behind closed doors. Inside the courtroom, everything slowed down. Every detail that had once been part of a fast-moving investigation was now examined piece by piece. Timelines were rebuilt. Evidence was presented with precision. Words spoken in interrogation rooms were repeated under oath. Daniel Varela sat at the center of it all, calm, controlled, almost distant. If there was remorse, it didn't show clearly. The prosecution laid out the case in a straight line. Elena arrived in San Estero. She went to Daniel's house. An argument took place. It escalated into violence. He struck her. She fell. And then, instead of helping her, he made a decision that defined everything that followed. He chose to end her life. The courtroom listened as forensic experts explained the injuries, the head trauma, the restraints, the cause of death. There was no ambiguity in their conclusions. The sequence of events matched the physical evidence. The timing aligned with phone records. The cleanup attempt explained the traces found in the house. It was all there, structured, clinical, unavoidable. Lucia Varela's testimony became one of the most critical parts of the trial. She spoke quietly, often looking down, but her account remained consistent with what she had told investigators. She described the argument, the moment things turned violent, and what happened after. Her role, she admitted, came later, helping to clean, helping to move the body, helping to hide what had been done. Her defense argued she had acted under pressure, caught in a situation she didn't create, but she had still made a choice. Mateo Ruiz remained different. He said very little. His lawyer maintained that he hadn't fully understood what he was walking into that night, that by the time he realized the truth, it was already too late. But the prosecution focused on actions, not claims. He stayed. He helped. He didn't report anything, and that, legally, was enough. When Daniel finally spoke, the courtroom shifted slightly, not because of what he said, but because of what he avoided. He admitted there had been an argument. He admitted things got out of control, but he denied intent. "I didn't plan it," he said. "I lost control." It was the same line he had used before. Emotional overwhelm, pressure, stress from debt, a situation that spiraled. But the prosecution countered with something simple. What did you do after? That question lingered, because losing control explains a moment. It doesn't explain everything that comes after. Daniel didn't call for help. He didn't contact emergency services. He didn't try to save Elena. Instead, he restrained her, then took her life, then cleaned the scene, then moved her body, then lied about all of it. The court didn't ignore that. They focused on it, because those actions weren't impulsive, they were deliberate. After weeks of testimony, the case went to judgment. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. Daniel Varela was found guilty of homicide and destruction of evidence. The sentence, 24 years in prison. Lucia Varela was found guilty of complicity and concealment. Her sentence, 7 years. Mateo Ruiz was convicted of aiding in the disposal of the body. His sentence, 5 years. For the prosecution, it was a complete outcome. For Elena's family, it was something else. Her mother had attended every session, quiet, composed, listening to every detail about her daughter's final hours. When the verdict was delivered, she didn't react immediately. No visible relief, no dramatic response, just a long, steady breath. Because justice, even when delivered, doesn't undo anything. Outside the courtroom, reactions were divided. Some believed the sentences were fair. Others felt they were too light, especially for those who had helped cover up the crime. The debate continued for weeks, but for those closest to Elena, the public conversation didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth had been established, even if some parts of it still felt incomplete. Months later, Daniel's legal team filed an appeal. They argued procedural issues, questioned the handling of certain evidence, suggested that Lucia's testimony had been influenced by pressure. It wasn't unusual. Appeals are part of the system. The case was reviewed again. This time, the focus shifted, not on what happened, but on how it had been proven. During the second proceedings, cracks began to form. Lucia softened parts of her earlier testimony. She didn't fully retract it, but her certainty shifted. Mateo remained consistent in his silence. Without strong reinforcement from their statements, some aspects of the case became less solid. The defense leaned into that. They questioned whether intent had truly been established beyond doubt. They emphasized the lack of a clear motive. They argued that emotional instability had not been properly considered. The court reassessed, carefully, slowly, and then a decision that changed everything. Daniel Varela's conviction was overturned. Insufficient evidence to fully support the original ruling. He was acquitted, released. The reaction was immediate. Public outrage, media coverage, debate across every platform. Some saw it as a failure of justice. Others saw it as the system correcting itself. Elena's family saw it differently. To them, nothing had changed. They had lost her once, and now it felt like they had lost something else, too. Closure. Lucia and Mateo's sentences remained. They continued serving their time, but the focus stayed on Daniel, on the unanswered questions, on the gap between what was believed and what could be proven. Years later, the case still lingers in conversation, not because of mystery, but because of that gap, the difference between truth and proof. Detective Sergio Alvarez retired not long after that, but the case stayed with him, not because it was unsolved, but because it was unfinished in a different way. Sometimes cases don't end cleanly. They don't tie together with certainty. They leave behind fragments, doubts, silences. Elena Marquez's story became one of those cases. A life that followed order, a decision that changed everything, and a truth that, even when uncovered, never fully settled. In many families, love and loyalty sit side by side with unspoken tension. On the surface, everything can look perfect. Smiles at gatherings, polite conversations, shared meals. But underneath, small resentments can quietly grow, feeding off pride, jealousy, and silence. Over time, those hidden fractures can widen into something far more dangerous. This is the story of Maya Thapa, a young woman whose life seemed to be moving towards something bright, only for it to end in a way no one could have imagined. Maya was born on September 12, 1996, in a modest town called Dharanpur in eastern Nepal. She was the eldest of 5 children in a family that struggled financially but stayed close. From a young age, Maya carried more responsibility than most kids her age. She helped raise her younger siblings, managed household chores, and often put her own needs aside for the sake of her family. Despite the pressure, Maya had a naturally warm personality. People were drawn to her kindness. She had an easy smile, a calm way of speaking, and a quiet confidence that made others feel comfortable around her. Teachers described her as disciplined and thoughtful. Friends knew her as someone who avoided conflict and tried to keep peace wherever she could. She also had dreams, big ones. Maya loved art and fashion. She spent hours sketching designs, experimenting with makeup, and imagining a future where she could build something of her own. But she knew that without money or connections, nothing would come easy. During her final years of school, Maya met Arjun Koirala. He came from a very different world. Arjun's family was wealthy, influential, and widely respected. His father, Dev Koirala, owned several businesses, and the family lived in a large home in the capital city Lalitpur. Compared to Maya's upbringing, Arjun's life had been one of comfort and privilege. At first, Maya and Arjun kept their distance. They knew how their families would react. But over time, shared conversations turned into a deeper connection. They understood each other in ways others didn't. Eventually, friendship turned into love. When their relationship became known, both families reacted strongly. Maya's family feared she would be looked down upon. Arjun's family outright rejected the idea. To them, Maya simply didn't belong in their social circle. But the two refused to give up. With the unexpected support of Arjun's older brother Rohan, they made a bold decision. They left quietly and got married in a small private ceremony in late 2017. Maya was just 21, Arjun was 22. The aftermath was messy. For a while, the couple struggled. They moved between small rented apartments, trying to build a life without stable income. Arjun took on whatever work he could find, while Maya tried to figure out her next step. Money was tight, and they depended heavily on Rohan's financial help. Then something changed. Arjun's mother, Mira, reached out. After long conversations, she agreed to let them move into the family home, but under conditions. It was clear this wasn't full acceptance, more like reluctant tolerance. Still, it was an opportunity. The Koirala residence was large, structured, and ruled by unspoken expectations. Living there were Arjun's parents, his older brother Rohan, Rohan's wife Nisha, and their young son. From the moment Maya arrived, she felt the difference. No one openly insulted her, but the distance was obvious. Conversations would stop when she entered a room. Invitations didn't include her. During a large family gathering shortly after her arrival, Maya was asked to stay in her room while guests visited. The message was clear without being spoken. She didn't belong. Despite that, Maya stayed patient. She remained respectful, helped around the house, and avoided confrontation. Slowly, things began to shift. Arjun secured a stable job through his father's connections and started earning well. At the same time, Maya decided to pursue her long-held dream. She wanted to open a small beauty studio. She had a plan, she had done the research. What she didn't have was money. When Arjun approached his parents for help, they refused. They didn't believe in her idea. Once again, it was Rohan who stepped in. He gave Maya the funds she needed, no conditions attached. Maya poured everything into the business. Long hours, constant effort, attention to detail. Within months, the business started gaining attention. Clients returned, word spread, the business became profitable faster than anyone expected. For the first time, the family began to see her differently. Respect replaced doubt. Conversations became warmer. She was no longer just tolerated, she was acknowledged. That shift changed everything. Maya finally felt like she had a place in the household. She and Arjun settled into a more stable routine. Life, for a while, felt balanced. She even reconnected with her own family. After years of tension, communication slowly resumed. Her younger brother, Suman, eventually moved to Lalitpur to attend university, staying with Maya and Arjun. The Koiralas accepted him without issue, which helped mend the relationship between the two families. At the same time, Maya discovered something new: social media. She began posting short videos online, makeup tutorials, styling tips, glimpses of her daily life. Her confidence in front of the camera, combined with her natural charm, quickly caught attention. Her following grew rapidly. Soon, local modeling agencies started reaching out. What started as small opportunities turned into something much bigger. Photo shoots, brand promotions, runway events. The work paid well, much more than her studio ever had. Eventually, Maya made a difficult decision. She closed the business and committed to modeling full-time. Her success only grew from there. She became well known locally, then started receiving offers from international agencies. Within a year, she and Arjun began seriously discussing moving abroad. Canada became their top choice. Both families reacted with mixed emotions. No one openly objected, but the idea of them leaving created unease. Not everyone was happy about Maya's rise. Nisha, Rohan's wife, had never liked her. From the beginning, she had seen Maya as an outsider. Even when the rest of the family began to accept her, Nisha held on to her resentment. Maya's success only made it worse. Where Maya was self-made, Nisha came from privilege. Where Maya earned admiration, Nisha felt overlooked. The tension between them stayed mostly under the surface. Small remarks, subtle digs, occasional arguments that Arjun would quickly shut down. But things began to escalate when Rohan's life took a downturn. He started experiencing serious health issues that affected his hearing. Over time, it forced him to step away from his work. The change hit him hard. He became withdrawn, spending more time at home. And Nisha saw an opportunity. She began feeding him stories about Maya, questioning her character, suggesting her modeling career was inappropriate, claiming she was becoming arrogant and distant. At first, Rohan dismissed it, but day after day, the same ideas were repeated. Slowly, they began to take root. At the same time, news of Maya and Arjun's plan to move abroad reached him. In his fragile state, it felt like abandonment. The brother he relied on was leaving, and in his mind, Maya was the reason. What had once been quiet tension inside the household was now turning into something far more unstable, and no one realized just how far it was about to go. By early 2019, the atmosphere inside the Koirala household had quietly shifted. Nothing dramatic on the surface. Meals were still shared, conversations still happened, but underneath, tension had started to build. Subtle at first, then harder to ignore. Maya noticed the change in Rohan before anyone else. He had always been steady, supportive, the kind of person who didn't let emotions take control. But now he seemed withdrawn. He spent most of his time at home, sitting alone for hours, lost in thought. His hearing had worsened significantly, and with it came frustration, isolation, and a growing sense of uselessness. Maya tried to be kind, just as she always had been. She checked in on him, included him in conversations, even encouraged Arjun to spend more time with his brother. But something wasn't right. Rohan no longer responded with warmth. His replies were short, distant. Sometimes he didn't respond at all. At the same time, Nisha had become more aggressive. Her dislike for Maya was no longer hidden behind polite behavior. She made comments openly now about Maya's clothes, her photos, her career. "You've changed," she would say, loud enough for others to hear. "This isn't how a married woman should behave." Maya usually stayed silent. Arjun would step in when necessary, shutting the conversation down before it could escalate. Over time, the rest of the family started ignoring Nisha's remarks altogether, but Rohan didn't ignore them. He listened. At first, he dismissed her complaints. He had always known his wife had a tendency to exaggerate, but Nisha was persistent. Every day she repeated the same narrative, reshaping it slightly, adding new details, making it sound more convincing. She told him Maya was becoming arrogant, that she looked down on the family, that she was planning to take Arjun away and cut ties completely, that her modeling career was just a cover for things she didn't want the family to know. Normally, he would have questioned it, but he was no longer in a normal state of mind. His world had shrunk, his career was gone, his independence was slipping away, and the one person he relied on most, his younger brother, was preparing to leave the country. Slowly, doubt began to creep in. He started watching Maya more closely, noticing small things and interpreting them in ways he never would have before. A phone call became secrecy. A late return from work became suspicion. Her excitement about Canada felt like betrayal. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense to him, or at least it felt like it did. Meanwhile, Maya remained unaware of how deeply things had changed. She knew Nisha didn't like her, that had always been clear, but she believed the rest of the family, especially Rohan, still saw her for who she really was. She was wrong. In April, Maya shared the final update with the family. Her visa process was moving forward. If everything stayed on track, she and Arjun would be leaving within a few months. The reaction was mixed. Her parents were emotional but supportive. Arjun's parents were quieter, clearly uneasy but not openly opposed. Rohan said nothing. Nisha, however, didn't hold back. "So that's it?" she said one evening at dinner. "You build your life here, use this family, and then just leave?" The room fell silent. Maya looked up, caught off guard. "That's not true. We've talked about this. It's an opportunity for both of us." "For you. Everything is always about you." Arjun stepped in immediately. "Enough." But the damage was done. Rohan had been watching the entire exchange, and in his mind, it confirmed everything he had been hearing. That night, something shifted in him. What had once been doubt began to harden into belief, and belief, slowly but surely, turned into anger. Over the next few weeks, that anger grew. Rohan became increasingly detached from everyone except Nisha. He stopped joining family activities altogether. He barely spoke to Arjun. When he looked at Maya, there was something cold in his expression, something that hadn't been there before. Maya noticed it now. She mentioned it to Arjun one night. "He's not okay," she said quietly. "Something's really wrong." Arjun sighed. "It's his health. He's been struggling. It'll pass." But Maya wasn't convinced. She had a feeling she couldn't shake, the kind that sits in the back of your mind telling you something isn't right, even if you can't explain why. A few days later, she called her mother. She didn't go into detail, but she admitted things were tense in the house, that Nisha was making things difficult, that Rohan had changed. Her mother listened carefully, then gave simple advice. "Stay calm, don't argue, focus on your future. You'll be leaving soon anyway." Maya agreed. She told herself it was temporary, just a few more months and she and Arjun would start fresh somewhere new, away from the tension, away from the quiet hostility. She held on to that thought. But inside the same house, someone else was holding on to something very different, resentment, and it was reaching a breaking point. May 9th, 2019 started like any other day inside the Koirala residence. The house followed its usual rhythm. Dev and Mira left for work in the morning. Arjun headed to his office shortly after. Nisha also went out, leaving her young son at school. Suman had classes at the university. By midday, the house had grown quiet. Only 3 people remained inside: Maya, Rowan, and Mira, who wasn't feeling well and had gone to rest in her room. There was nothing unusual about the day. No arguments, no raised voices, no warning signs that anything was about to happen. Around noon, Maya stepped outside into the small garden area. She carried a container of water, planning to tend to the plants she had been growing along the edge of the house. It was something she enjoyed, a simple routine that helped her relax. She moved casually, humming to herself, completely unaware that she was being watched. From the upper floor balcony, Rowan stood still, looking down. He had been thinking about this moment for days, maybe longer. Inside his mind, everything had already been decided. The doubts, the anger, the stories he had been told, they had all blended into something that felt like certainty. To him, this was no longer confusion, it was justification. Maya finished watering the plants and went back inside. A few minutes later, she walked into her room and lay down on the bed, scrolling through her phone. The house remained silent. Rowan turned away from the balcony and walked downstairs. At first, he went into the kitchen. He picked up a knife, holding it in his hand for a moment, then he put it back. It wasn't enough. He moved to a storage area where tools were kept. After searching briefly, he found what he was looking for, a heavy, curved blade used for cutting and chopping. He held it firmly. Then he walked upstairs. Each step was steady, no hesitation, no second thoughts. When he reached Maya's room, the door was slightly open. He pushed it gently and stepped inside. Maya looked up from her phone. "Do you need something?" she asked, her voice calm, unaware. Rowan didn't answer. He took a few steps closer. At first, she didn't understand what was happening. It wasn't until she noticed the object in his hand that her expression changed. Confusion turned into alarm in a split second. Before she could react, he raised the blade. Maya instinctively lifted her arm to protect herself. The attack began. What followed was fast, chaotic and brutal. Maya tried to defend herself, to move, to escape, but there was no time. The suddenness of it left her with no real chance. The room, moments ago quiet and ordinary, turned into a scene of violence. Within minutes, it was over. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that came before. Rowan stood there, breathing heavily, the reality of what he had done slowly settling in. Then, almost mechanically, he turned and walked out of the room. He went straight to his mother. Mira, still resting, looked up as he entered. One look at him was enough. She saw the state he was in and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. "What happened?" she asked. His answer was direct. "I've killed her." The words didn't fully register at first. When they did, panic took over. Instead of calling for help immediately, Mira reached for her phone and contacted her husband. Her voice shook as she told him to come home at once. She didn't explain clearly, only that something serious had happened. Dev returned quickly. Together, they contacted the police. But when officers arrived, confusion filled the situation. In a moment that would later raise many questions, the couple initially tried to distance themselves from what had happened inside the house. The condition of the scene made immediate identification difficult, but investigators quickly began piecing things together. They insisted on bringing in Maya's parents for confirmation. The call came in the afternoon. Maya's mother answered. The voice on the other end was trembling, urgent, asking them to come immediately. No clear explanation, just fear and insistence. The distance wasn't far, but traffic delays turned the journey into hours. By the time they arrived, the house was surrounded. Police vehicles, onlookers, a growing crowd whispering among themselves. Near the entrance, Suman sat on the ground, his face buried in his hands, shaking. Maya's father was taken inside. What he saw in that room would stay with him for the rest of his life. There was no preparing for it, no way to process it in that moment. The shock, the grief, the disbelief, it all hit at once. He walked out, unable to speak. His wife understood without needing words. Their daughter was gone. Outside, emotions erupted. Questions, accusations, disbelief. Maya's parents demanded answers, demanding that everyone in the household be held responsible. But the police had already taken someone into custody. Rowan had confessed. He gave a full statement, admitted everything, described what he had done without attempting to shift blame onto anyone else. He claimed he had acted alone. Investigators examined the scene, collected evidence, and built the case. Despite suspicions from Maya's family that Nisha had influenced the situation, there was no direct evidence linking her to the act itself. Legally, the responsibility fell on Rowan alone. The trial that followed was long and emotionally charged. Maya's family pushed for maximum punishment. They spoke openly about the environment she had been living in, the tension, the hostility, the psychological pressure. Arjun stood with them. Despite the man on trial being his own brother, he didn't hesitate. He testified truthfully, supported Maya's parents, and made it clear that what had happened was unforgivable. The Koirala parents took a different stance. They hired an experienced legal team, hoping to reduce Rowan's sentence. They argued that his deteriorating health, his hearing loss, and his emotional instability had affected his judgment. An appeal was later filed, introducing a new argument that Rowan had been suffering from a psychological condition. The court ordered evaluations. After thorough assessment, specialists concluded that while he had been under stress, He was fully aware of his actions. He understood what he was doing and the consequences of it. The defense failed. In the end, the verdict stood. Rowan was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Maya's family, it was justice, but not closure. Nothing could undo what had happened. Arjun stayed in Nepal until the legal process was complete. He supported Maya's parents through every stage, even as his own relationship with his family fractured beyond repair. When it was finally over, he left the country. He went to Canada, the place he and Maya had once planned to build a future together, but this time he went alone. The house in Lalitpur remained, but everything inside it had changed. What once looked like a perfect family had been broken from within, not from strangers, but from resentment, influence, and a silence that allowed it all to grow unchecked. And in the end, it cost a life that once held so much promise.